Hey, good morning, guys. You ever gone all in on a fitness routine, made great progress, had a lot of enthusiasm, and then slowly over time, something began to shift internally? Now, if so, you're not alone. I've gone through this cycle many, many times. And it's extremely common with guys in their 40s and 50s. It's common, but it's not unavoidable. In today's video, I'm going to share with you the training shifts that need to happen to prevent this cycle of rapid progress followed by slow burnout and declining results in the gym. So when I was 16 years old, my parents finally lifted the cap on my running. At the time, I was playing basketball, I was playing soccer, and because I was growing, they limited me in my running outside of these sports to roughly 15 miles a week. So my dad was a Marine, and in the military, the minimum required weekly PT that you have to do is running 3 miles 3 days a week. And so he set that as the cap. And then I would run a mile in the morning before breakfast with the dog, and then I would do these three-mile runs at different times of the week. So I really loved running though, and when I was 16, my parents finally decided that, hey, you're old enough, maybe, we can allow you to run a little bit more. Well, what they didn't realize is that a little bit more actually meant that I'd be running 60 plus miles a week in my runs. And at first, I did feel great, right? At the peak, I was doing training runs, running at about a 6 minute per mile pace for 10 minutes for these 10 miles. And then slowly something began to shift, right? I began to feel fatigued before I'd even head out the door for my run. But being the disciplined kind of guy that I am, maybe a little bit OCD tendencies, I don't know if that's the right word, but being a very disciplined sort of individual, I would ignore this. I would chalk it up to, maybe I just had a little extra schoolwork or something, and maybe I'm feeling a little bit lazy today. Let's go out there and do it. And the results from my running were confirming what was going on in my head. I would go for a run, and I would feel good after I got done with the run. But over the next weeks and into the following month or two, the fatigue just kept on growing until finally, one day, I had to stop about halfway into my run and walk the 5 miles back because my body just said, that's enough, we're not doing it anymore, and I couldn't run. I was in phenomenal shape, but my body just said, we've had enough, and you need to take a break. So, I was a young guy, right? Looking back, maybe I had been under fueling. My mom was very big into health food stuff, so I wasn't eating junk food, which is very easy to get a lot of calories in. And when you're eating health food, you're doing all this mileage and stuff, perhaps. And I was eating a pretty low-fat diet too, which is not going to be the greatest for when your mileage starts getting up into that super high volume range. So looking back, maybe I was a little under fueling. Maybe, my body was still growing. Being 16, you're still going through hormonal changes in, the bone structure and stuff. Different things are going on. You're prepping, getting ready to, pushing through high school, getting ready to figure out what you're going to do for the rest of your life as an adult, those kind of things. So more pressure, but the big issue, the biggest reason that I burned out in hindsight, in retrospect, was the same thing that affects many guys in their 40s, in their 50s, right? You get into a routine that you're comfortable with, and then it produces some results, and you keep on pushing the same volume, the same routine, the same intensity, week after week, month after month, with never strategically shifting gears to allow your mind, your body, and your nervous system to recover from all the training that you're doing. I often tell my clients inside of my programs that, you're going to make some good progress initially. Once you actually learn the proper technique, the proper form, you get that dialed in, that's the most important piece, right? Once you get that, dialed in, this is a new stimulus for your body. So you're likely going to make some very rapid progress, right? But then eventually we're going to have to change things up to continue having you see progress because like I said, if you keep on hammering the same volume, the same intensity, you can't always be climbing the hill indefinitely and expect to, never level off, right? So, that's when we need to make some strategic changes to this, right? So burnout, if you're wondering, right, if you're experienced, it could show up in many different ways, right? Some of the common ways that burnout can show up is, like me, you're feeling persistently fatigued. Maybe you're having, changes in your mood, your motivation. Maybe you're a little bit more grumpy. You are, uh, just don't have the motivation to train. You're not as excited about going to the gym. In the beginning, when you're first starting out a fitness routine, motivation tends to be a bigger issue. Or like motivation is high, but I guess I should make the distinction. Enthusiasm, right? If you feel bad about not being in shape, the motive or the motivation to work out is there. But we often interchangeably use motivation and enthusiasm, right? So that enthusiasm, when you haven't seen the results yet, can be a little bit lower, right? And so once you get in shape, though, enthusiasm tends to be pretty good. So if you're like me and you're feeling great on your runs, and then all of a sudden the motivation is dipping, the enthusiasm is not where it used to be, that can be a sign that it's time to shift gears, right? If you're having difficulty either falling asleep or you're waking up frequently during the night, that can be caused by numerous different things. But one of those things is overtraining, right? Doing the same stimulus, pushing too long without changing up how you are approaching your training. That can be one of those things. If your joints are always aching, I recall that when after burning out with the running, I got back into running at a little bit more moderate rate, not as much mileage as I had been doing before. And then it was only, maybe 6 months later, I ended up injuring my back at work. And so now I couldn't run, right? And so I started doing bench pressing and some curls and stuff like that in the basement, riding on a stationary bike to try to stay in shape. That transitioned me into a love of weightlifting, right? And same thing kind of happened there, right? Where I was always trying to lift heavier, right? I was, you see this rapid progress. You go from being this 145-pound distance runner. Now you're, bulked up to 165 pounds. You're pushing 225 in the bench press, and you're feeling strong and you want to keep on getting stronger. But what I found is when I was always pushing the heavy weights, the low reps and stuff, my joints started aching. And that can be a thing that happens too, right? When you're always just focused on more, right? And that can happen on the endurance end of things too. If you're trying to get more reps, do longer static holds with stuff, it's always pushing the envelope. As guys, we tend to have this approach to things where it's like, whatever our and it's not just guys either, but just as people, like if there's anything that we are passionate about doing, there's the desire to let's up the ante, let's do it better than the last time, let's go more, right? There's that guy on YouTube really was almost like the Arnold Schwarzenegger of hybrid athlete stuff. Like hybrid athlete training has been around for a long time. I mean, the military has been doing that for centuries, right? And stuff. And Alex Valletta was doing it for like decades before Nick Baer came on the scene. But similar to Arnold Schwarzenegger, Nick Baer has some more of the charismatic personality. He's the marketing savvy and stuff, and so really brought it to the forefront. But that thing about, his tagline is "Go one more," right? Go one more, and it really epitomizes a lot of the mentality that we as men often have. Is if we're passionate about something, if it's running, okay, let's see, can we run farther, right? Can we run faster? If we're into powerlifting, let's see how much weight we can lift. Keep on getting stronger and stronger and stronger and stronger, without realizing that running farther, running faster, or lifting heavier weights, building bigger muscle isn't a linear process, right? It's not a never-ending climb to the top. In fact, the closer you get to perfection, the closer you get to mastery of anything, the harder it gets to continue progressing. The more you have to use strategy, intellect, savvy about how you approach the training, rather than just relying on willpower and pushing harder, right? You will never win. I often like to say you will never win in a battle of wills against your body. You can't outwork physiology, right? But when you work alongside physiology, when you respect your body, when you work strategically with it, it allows you to work harder without burning out. Because I'm not about telling you guys, hey, let's stop working hard, let's baby ourselves. But the point is, are we trying to prove something to other people by how impressive our workouts are? Or are we trying to get better? And there's a difference, right? The goal should always be to get better, not to show how hard we can work in this given section, right? So other things that can happen is, having irregular bowel movements too, right? That can happen. Leaky gut can actually be fairly common among long distance runners. All the jarring and the pounding all the time and stuff. But when it comes to strength training, um, these things can happen too. All right. So this burnout is especially prevalent with guys in their 40s and 50s, right? Who, when you're in your 20s, when you're in high school, uh, especially when you're in high school, right? You have your parents are taking care of you, right? They're paying the bills, they're feeding you. You basically have to worry about getting your homework done and doing your training for your sport, right? Now you graduate, you are the person providing for your kids if you have them, or at least yourself, right? And then, so you got to make sure that you got a roof over your head. If you have other people depending on you, you have to make sure that they have a roof over their head, and then trying to squeeze in the training. So your training should not look like it did at 25. And it's not strictly because your body is older, it's also because the environment that you're training in is much, much different, right? So this burnout from trying to push the old routines, right, that used to work for you when you were 25, when you were in high school, when you're in college, is extremely common for guys in their 40s and 50s who now have families, careers, maybe you even run a business, right? It's extremely common, but it's not unavoidable. In fact, it's when the margins are thinnest, right? That structured training isn't just a nice to have, right? It's not like, well, it's nice to be structured with how I train. It's nice to put things together like this and train smart instead of training just training hard. It's absolutely essential. It's the difference between the guys who are still going, still showing up, still in shape at 40, 50, 60, 70, 80 years old, and the guys who are slowly falling behind. So next week, I'm going to be revealing how a hybrid approach to strength training can help you to continue pushing hard, continue staying strong, despite having a busy schedule, having the more demands on your routine. Like my routine today looks a lot different than it did when before I went into full-time business, right? Looks different than before I went to college, right? In fact, the hybrid strength program, as I talked about in some other videos, I designed it after, because like for many years, I was working a physical job, and then I would do 4 days a week. I'd be doing full bodybuilding splits on top of that, right? And so the approach that I needed for that was actually being a lot more strategic to figure out how do I not be in a constant calorie deficit with the amount of physical labor that I'm doing, the erratic meal times when I'm not able to eat on a consistent basis. Most bodybuilders are eating at least 4 times a day, oftentimes 6 times a day, right? How do I get the calories that I need when I'm doing all this kind of stuff and not eating junk food, right? Because you can get a lot of calories from drinking a bunch of beer, drinking a bunch of alcohol, eating a bunch of fried foods, junk food, and stuff like that. But those aren't the kind of foods that are going to build a body that you are proud to have. They're not the kind of foods that are going to support the chemical structure of your cells to keep you healthy long term, right? So yeah, you can get the calories in and stuff, but if you were trying to eat healthy, it was really hard, right? And so my approach had to be strategic even then, right? People think, well, you have a physical job, right? So of course you're going to be in shape, right? But we see guys who have beer bellies and stuff and are working concrete jobs in their 40s and 50s, right? When they were younger, they were thinner and stuff. But if you're just relying on do more, do more, do more, eventually that strategy doesn't pan out. And so you got to know why you're doing it. And so when I transitioned from doing that job, now I'm having a little bit more sedentary job, plus I'm going back to school for more classes, right? And at that time, that's when I created hybrid strength training, because I didn't have hours and hours to go to the gym, do the stuff, plus because my margins were lower, because I had the full-time job and I was going to school, I didn't have not only like, yeah, sure, maybe I could have still trained the same way, but being able to recover and bounce back from that with the extra workload, that was different too. So it's not about that, you can't continue training, but the way that you train needs to be adjusted. That's what I'm going to be talking about in next week's video, right? But before that video happens, before we talk about the specifics of, the hybrid strength training and stuff and how it helps you to, have a busy work schedule, busy family schedule, and still make progress without burning out. Before we talk about that, I want to know from you guys, have you had this experience before? Drop me in the comments if you have ever started out with a routine and made some great progress and then had to stop doing it because it wasn't a match for your life. You were burning out, right? It wasn't sustainable with everything else that you were carrying in your life. And if I get no comments in the comment section, I know that there's guys holding back, because I know this is an extremely common scenario for guys to go through. In fact, it's one of the biggest reasons why guys don't continue to train consistently in their 40s and 50s, is because of this issue of continuing to burn out and not being able to do the things that they did in their 20s and 25s, and not knowing how to continue making progress going forward. So if you can relate to that, share your experience down below. Let the other guys know they're not alone. Don't have to be bashful. Share that below, and I will see you all in next week's video.